All right, everyone, welcome back to Now Granted. It's been a little bit over a year since the last time that we've been here, but I am joined by Kevin and Michael, and my name is Ryan. We're about to sit back and relax and talk about this quarantine that we're all in. So, how you doing, guys?
I'm
I'm
doing
doing
great.
great. We got the it's like a what do you call it? It's like the world ending got the gang back together. So
Yeah, pretty much, right?
talking about quarantine, I'm technically not in quarantine because I have to, unlike you guys, I have to go to work every day.
Yeah, that's true. I have been furloughed from my job, unfortunately, but looks like because of the bill that got passed, I'll be getting most of the pay that I would have been getting generally. So can't complain too much,
Well, I mean,
Yeah, it's like, who needs a job anymore?
right? The government can
Just
just print the
collect your
money and
you
unemployment.
you know
yeah,
what? It's like Yang Gang actually won the election and no one knew about it.
it's true. That
U,
it's interesting that that
UBI
policy.
for UBI for everybody, son.
Well, it's a weird mixture of UBI and added money to unemployment and everything else. Because we get you get the $1,200 just as a direct check that everybody gets. Then there's also the $600 a week that's been added to unemployment, which still hasn't hit yet, but everybody should be getting that here in the next couple weeks.
Well, I mean, all you guys who don't have jobs.
That's true.
Well, I mean, then the question is like if I'm under the impression when you're on when you're furloughed, you can't get unemployment.
No, that's not true. So even outside of this situation, you can get unemployment with just a reduction in hours. So if you go from full time to less than full time, you can file for unemployment at that point.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so originally I got a reduction of hours at my job, and then that's when I applied, and then eventually I got furloughed. But because I applied when I did, I'm kind of at the head of the line, so that's kind of nice.
Okay. Oh, damn. Look at you. Super smart.
Yeah, it pays to pay attention, right?
Yeah, well, because I know a few friends who've gotten furloughed from their jobs and stuff like that. And they can't get anything. Um, they're pretty much in a position where they have to literally just sit until they're no longer furloughed because if they quit, they can't apply, they can't qualify for unemployment for quitting, and they technically still do have jobs.
Weird. I would suggest that they apply for unemployment because I believe that they can.
Hmm. Okay.
Unless they're salaried and still receiving their salary, that would be the only reason.
No, when you're furloughed, at least in the position that a few people that I know, um, they're furloughed. They have the company is paying for all their benefits, and if they have retirement, the retirement. Um, but they're not receiving salary because they're technically not working.
Yeah, see that's weird. Because I'm in the exact same position, but I'm still able to receive unemployment.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. Sorry, my comp. I don't know if my company is still paying their half of my health insurance. I am not paying the portion of my health insurance that gets taken out of my paycheck. But I still have health insurance, and I'm gonna have to give that money back, pay that money back once I'm employed again.
Hmm. Okay. No, I
So
mean because with like I said, the people that I know, the company is their employer is paying for everything except their salary.
interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely something to look into.
Okay. Well, it seems like you know more about that than I do. I'm just an essential worker wearing a
Yeah,
gas mask every day.
as one
That
of my
some
friends termed a jobber.
a jobber. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm an essential. I wear a gas mask that actually surprisingly fits very well with my sunglasses. So,
As we can
um,
all see with that beautiful picture that you sent us, that
it is the best of both worlds. I can wear shades and I get to wear a gas mask and a hat. It's fantastic. It's just like all three things just rolled up into one.
It's to maximally obscure your face, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and then also to maximally not get the coronavirus when I'm out and about. So
Fair enough. You should just show up to like go grocery shopping with that thing on.
already have. I do
That's
it. I
awesome.
do every time I want to go out. I even walk from my. I walk like a quarter mile from where I park my car to where I'm staying, where I'm living right now, and I wear that thing everywhere I go because I'm not getting sick.
See, I'm not worried about it, man. I don't know. I'm just completely unconcerned.
You should be worried about it.
I feel like I feel like if I were going to get it, I've already gotten it. Is my kind of how I've been operating. So my job was to drive audio video equipment all over Southern California, and literally the job was to go and drop it off at the convention centers and hotels across Southern California. So I'm talking San Diego Convention Center, Los Angeles Convention Center, Anaheim Convention Center, Long Beach Convention Center. Literally all of the places I'm most likely to interact with the virus, I've already been, and I was there until like a month ago. So it's
Yeah.
entirely possible that somebody from Wuhan got off the plane, came to one of the events that we provided equipment for, sang karaoke using one of our mics, and then I brought that back into our shop.
But did you actually experience the symptoms of the Shanghai shivers?
No, I have not. But there's also plenty of people. The problem is we don't actually know who has or hasn't experienced
Yeah,
it. You know?
pretty much it makes the numbers reported. I wouldn't say completely irrelevant, but close to irrelevant, just for the fact that the majority of the cases that are reported since this all started have been people that have been actually hospitalized,
Yeah.
and that's like not on the street. So widespread testing is still being, let's say, implemented slowly, but yeah, the majority of the cases that have been reported so far have been um, those who have been seriously hospitalized, and not
Yeah.
people who've stayed home.
Well, and then the other half of it are people that have died after the coronavirus has been pretty prevalent. A lot of them just get blanket marked with, "Oh, you're a coronavirus death." We didn't actually test you. We don't know if you have it, but you had a fever and then you died of something else. So clearly, it was coronavirus.
That could be quite possible, but like I
Well,
said, with the
I know that
I
that's
don't
what
know
they're
about
doing
the
in
death. I
Italy.
just know about the reporting when it comes to the actual cases. It's all just been most of them been hospitalizations. It hasn't been, let's say, like voluntary testing, or it hasn't been
Yeah.
like they say widespread testing or self testing.
Well, and for me, I've been kind of keeping up with the testing just because I've been investing in testing companies on the
Oh, of
stock
course you have.
market. So I'm very well aware of where we're at with all that.
Yeah. Well, um, just hopefully that you haven't been investing in companies that say like that are Chinese based companies that have been sending testing kits across the world. Um,
uh,
Found that
um,
actually a huge supply of testing kits that were supposed to go to England had to be sent back because they were infected with the coronavirus.
yeah. So
And
I
then
haven't. I
and
was
then there was
fortunately that
another
was
and there was another big batch that had to be sent back. I think also from England or from another place that originated from China, just because they didn't work. So England
yeah.
got a big whole crate full of tests that didn't work. They had to send those back, and then when they got a test, and then they got more testing kits that they had to send back because they were actually infected with the coronavirus. So it's like it's just
Yeah.
those, like these two terrible things. And now their prime minister Boris Johnson is now in the ICU.
Yeah, that's really tough, and I hope that he recovers because can you imagine if any of these leaders start dropping dead, the toll it would take on our economy?
I mean, you should see the toll it's taking on it right now. But yeah,
Well, I
now
mean, yeah,
if world leaders start dropping, If more higher, like say AAA grade celebrities start dropping from this,
Yeah.
our
Fortunately,
own
it's
congressmen and our own senators, God forbid, in quotation marks, get this. Um, yeah, oh yeah, like people would have no faith in the economy whatsoever.
oh yeah, it
Um,
would just be an absolute nightmare. And I don't want to make it sound like any life is more important than any other, but it just political and economic ramifications of certain people. It would be devastating.
well, I mean, if you look at Boris Johnson, because he's prime minister of the UK,
Yep.
and he's more or less the one who's like pushed actually has pushed Brexit through. Um, so you have that figurehead who's pushing Brexit through and trying to get England reorganized in something that's, let's say, not so um, dependent on the European Union, which in itself is kind of collapsing in because of this thing. But that's a side note. And
Well,
then
and
he
and
just ups and dies. Uh, that makes the English system economically and politically, domestically, and then also internationally, very, very questionable.
yeah, that's true. So, Kevin, we kind of found out a little bit about what's going on with me and Mikey. How have you been?
I actually thought that I had the coronavirus because right when it started getting really out of control, like early March,
Mm-hmm.
I got really sick. I had a fever up to like 104 and it was
Woo!
fluctuating between 100 and 104. I was like, holy shit, I have coronavirus. Um, then I went to the doctor. They said, oh, you just have the flu. But I'm really suspicious because I have never been that sick before.
Mm-hmm.
I I did feel like I was dying, and
Jeez, that's
I still have a
crazy.
little cough. So I think it was the fact that I had diarrhea
Mm.
that because that's not a symptom of coronavirus, but they just
Well,
labeled me
So,
as a flu.
surprisingly, it actually it is having digestive issues tends to follow let's say the fever and the dry cough, but in some cases people get digestive issues before they actually get the fever and the cough or the coof.
yeah. Well, and it's so crazy that they were trying to tell you what is or isn't a symptom before we actually know, because we get told constantly that hydroxychloroquine and basically hydroxychloroquine doesn't work because there hasn't been a study, but it's not like there's been a study to determine what the specific symptoms of coronavirus are.
Well, I mean, there actually have been, there have been, there. I would say it's completely detailed, but there have been studies on usually what generally how the symptoms run.
Well, but
When it
well,
comes
the
when it comes to the actual was it hydrochloroquine or the is it hydrochloroquine?
yeah, so it's hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine. What they what's interesting about hydroxychloroquine is that people are prompting it as something that when you mix it, kind of like you mix it in a cocktail, or not mix it in a cocktail, but you run it with a couple of other drugs simultaneously.
Yeah, so
Is that
just to be clear, oh,
there was one study done in France, but the issue is that they had no control group. So um, they kind of just put it on people, and people recovered. And they're like, okay, hey, guess what? These people recovered. It must kind of work. Um, but as we have no vaccine and we have really no drugs to combat this thing, initially they were kind of the Chinese and the countries affected subsequently after have been kind of just throwing everything at it. So at one point they were giving people AIDS medication, they were giving people Ebola medication, with the malaria medication and a bunch of other things, kind of all at once to see what would
yeah.
work.
Well,
And
the thing. So it's been very crazy. So what we're talking about are what other people have termed the Trump pills. So that is hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and then you combine that with zinc, and that supposedly is
yes,
supposed to have a very good effect on helping your body to recover. And it's very disingenuous the way that the media has been portraying this, just because Trump came out so early in support of them. So they had to come out and say, "Oh no, we don't know if they work. Trump's supporting them, so clearly they must be bad." Is essentially the tact that they took. So a
Oh,
lot of people,
I
yeah,
100% agree with that. Actually, it was the media was the first people to downplay this virus in the first place.
yep.
Um,
Well, so
and
so let
then it
me
was
so
only until Trump coming out saying that, agreeing with the media, like this is just a flu, this is just a bad cough, everything's gonna be okay. Then the media kind of switched up and said, "Oh no, this is the world-ending pandemic," which it actually
yeah.
is.
I
But
I think it's
they were
somewhere in the middle, to
downplaying
be
it because
honest.
it was, at least if I remember correctly, they were downplaying this whole thing because calling it the Wu flu, and everything else like that was too racist, and you shouldn't be racist towards Asians. So they took the path of don't be racist towards Asians until Trump said, "Hey, this is just a flu. Don't worry about it." And then they're like, "Oh no, this is a pandemic. This is a global, a world-ending pandemic." Which,
Yeah.
truthfully, it is. They just downplayed it because that's what they do. And
Well, the
the
problem is
administration
we'll
downplayed it, and
the biggest issue is we'll never actually know if it is or isn't a world-ending flu unless the world actually ends, because
well, that's true.
because what's going to happen is at some point it's going to go away, and at that point everyone will say one of two things: it was either a hoax the whole time, it was a complete scam by the mainstream media and the government to try to take your rights away, right? The other side of the story is going to be everything we did, the shelter in place, everybody staying in, shutting the economy down for a month or 2 months or whatever it ends up being. They'll claim that that worked, and that's why we don't see the massive outbreak that everybody was predicting. And so, unfortunately, there's really no way to tell which one of those stories is true because they're both going to use the exact same facts.
I would go with probably the latter than the former. If we want to, like, let's say, hypothesize
I'm gonna choose to believe that it actually is a potentially world-ending flu, just because I'm just gonna be mad and upset for no reason if I choose the other.
Well, no, I mean but I mean the thing is that it's most likely going to be the latter. If let's say if it doesn't go whatever, but how this virus operates, how just resilient it is comparatively to other coronaviruses and comparatively to, let's say, to other viruses in general. Um, this is going to be one of these things that won't actually just go away. It'll just be something that we'll just have to reside with for the rest of our
Well,
lives.
my
So,
prediction is number one. I do believe hydroxychloroquine and the azithromycin combined with zinc work. Hydroxychloroquine has been proven to work on other coronaviruses, so it's a complete lie that the mainstream media has been propagating that it's untested. They are correct that for the specific strain called SARS-CoV-2, that's the specific strain
yes,
that we're talking about. It has not been tested on that specific strain, but generally the family of coronaviruses do see an effect from that medication. And
yes.
essentially the way that it works and the reason it works on malaria and the reason we think it works on coronavirus is because it slows down the ability for the virus to reproduce. And it really does that if you combine it with zinc, because zinc has that property regardless, and so it kind of supercharges the zinc in your system. Is essentially the way that's been described to me.
Yep. But it's not all around perfect, and I'm
No,
gonna
no, nothing's
quote,
perfect.
at least take references from African Twitter, just because as the world has been, let's say, has been promoting this drug as a way of combating COVID-19, let's say SARS-CoV-2.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they've been on a laugh track right now, just for the fact they're Africa as the continent and the people that reside there have been taking this to combat malaria for a very long time now.
Oh yeah, they
Um,
pass it out like
and
candy if you got a fever.
yeah, in their words, they'd rather get COVID-19 than take hydrochloroquine. Was it the malaria drugs? Because the malaria drugs cause deafness and blindness and other side effects. So
That's interesting. I'm not saying that
they're
they
they're
don't
just,
have those side effects,
they're
but
just. Oh no, I'm not saying either. I'm just reporting that they're just
yeah,
having a laugh track at us because now we have to take the drug that they've been taking and leaving people deaf and blind and
Well, and
a
the
whole host of
interesting
other
thing
things.
is, the interesting thing is that it hasn't been so bad in
So,
Africa, from what I've heard. Have you guys heard that that's changed at all?
hmm?
From my understanding, this hasn't really affected Africa or South America to the same degree that it's affected us here in the northern hemisphere.
Well, they probably don't have the infrastructure to test people. I mean,
That's possible,
I
but
can
we
look
would.
at India, and India has, I would, in my presumption, severely underreported all their cases. So when it comes to Africa and when it comes to South America, either they're probably just not testing, um, just
Well,
because they don't have the infrastructure to test.
my guess is it's one of two things or a combination. One, we believe that there is for whatever reason, there's a correlation between it being summertime and a reduction in the spread of the virus. But then also number two, both of those continents have really bad malaria issues, and so the general populace has taken those hydroxychloroquine type drugs in the past, and they have more access to them generally. So my guess is the people with the weakest immune systems are already on those medications or have access to them readily. But one of those two factors, I think, is why
For
we
the
haven't seen it as
former,
bad there.
temperature does not do anything to curb the spread of the virus.
Well, how do
Just
we
as
know
we
that?
see that there was huge outbreaks in Indochina and in Singapore, and
Well,
as
yeah,
this thing was
but that was
breaking
during
out, like let's
winter.
say in Singapore is a good example, it's like 85, 90 degrees there already. So when
Well,
it
yeah,
comes to
but
the seasons had really nothing to do with it. And now for the latter, when it comes to the readily available of hydroxychloroquine and other malaria drugs, I can't say.
yeah.
So,
Well, I don't know that we know enough about the disease to say if it does or doesn't spread because of temperature. The issue is, did it come into the region, when it was cooler, and now it's in the office buildings and inside where people are spreading it to each other. That would be a difference where, during the summer it just doesn't show up in the first place. But now that it's hit a certain threshold, it sticks around. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and Singapore is right on the equator, so they don't really experience seasons.
Is it?
it's
It's
just
on the
hot.
equator.
Yeah, it's just hot all the time. Isn't
Interesting.
it? Isn't it right on the equator?
I didn't think so.
No, it should be south of the equator.
Or pretty close to it.
Singapore?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Singapore in Indonesia or near Indonesia, Indochina, the
So
Indo-Asia part of the world. There we go. That's say a right answer and then a wrong answer and a really really wrong answer, all at once.
yeah, you're right. It is right there on the equator. Interesting.
Oh,
Has it been pretty
there
bad
we go.
there?
Yeah.
So, now when it comes to Indonesia, or when it comes to Singapore, let's not say anything wrong. When it comes to Singapore, they've had a lot of cases, but they have very little deaths, and they have a lot recovered just because they have a great healthcare system. So,
Yeah.
and also they're really strict, rigid, and disciplined. So it's just one of those things that they enacted quarantine when they needed to. They've banned travel when they needed to, and they've kind of tackled this thing from the top down.
Hmm.
Um, so that's just kind of like how they operate and how they function. So I mean, they were kind of on top. They were on top of it from like day one. So,
Yeah.
but
Well, and they're a lot
yeah,
closer to it, and they have a lot better data than we would, just because of their physical distance from China, but also just being at part of that region, you're going to get better information than we would have had.
well, I mean, but what
They they keep track of everyone in their
Yeah,
country.
yeah.
and
But the
it's just
problem
not
is
feasible.
when it comes to actually long term data on this thing, like the one example that we need, what we really need to actually come forth like forthfully and like truthfully would be China, and
Yep.
they've been lying since day one. So
Well, they've been lying since day one, and
they
now they're
they're
not even
covering this
giving out
up
answer. What?
as
Sorry.
let's say outward from October, November, to make it more conservatively. Had the outbreak supposedly in December, said they had it contained by January, paid pretty much the WHO to spout off saying that everything was okay, and then by the end of January saying, "Oh no, it's out and about. Sorry." You know,
Yeah.
Actually, no, no, they didn't even say sorry. They said sorry in March. My bad. So,
Have
and then so pretty much by March they were apologizing for everything, and they let, at least if the Wall Street Journal, their expose on it in January is correct, like 5 million people left the Wuhan province and went across the world when
yeah.
being affected by this freaking. So, um, and then supposedly now by the beginning of March, they supposedly now have no cases, even though that they really implemented severe and draconian policies to get this thing, curbed.
Yeah, there's zero
Um,
chance that's true.
I,
Yeah, I showed you this graph yesterday. I just wanted to show if anyone's watching right now
You
how
got to
the curve has
position it more
flattened
to
in China,
the
probably
left.
because they are underreporting.
Sorry, so I
yeah.
had to cut your
Oh,
screen a little bit. So if you can, other way, move the other way, a little bit more. There you
This
there
go.
we
way?
go.
Oh, more,
Or,
more to other way. Sorry, other way. There you go. There we go. Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay,
there we
total
go.
cases and it's a graph. Cool.
Yeah, so it looked like
Yeah,
it
and
leveled
that's
off
is that
in
China?
mid-February.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the China cases.
Yeah, it's
Now
China
this
total
is
cases, and
this is
they
this
stopped
comes from
reporting.
the how do you call it? This comes from a live stream that I watched I think last week, and they report, at least from this live stream, they reported um, that British intelligence told Downing Street, which would have been, their executive branch of their government, that the Chinese were reporting underreporting a factor of 15 to 40, which is 3/8, which is roughly like
Jeez,
37.5%, the actual total numbers.
that's crazy.
Um, so they would, uh, at this point, probably have, if that's correct, probably, let's say, somewhere a little less than 100,000 cases than we do, and roughly about nearly the same amount of deaths.
That's crazy.
But the thing is that when you have a crisis like this, and knowing how China is the center of manufacturing for the world, it's in their interest to underreport everything, and it's in their interest to make themselves look stable and ready to go, and
Yeah.
have put on the face that they actually beaten this thing, which they probably have not. Just so that people can still use that manufacturing capacity of theirs.
Well, they've got to be real concerned.
So
There's gonna we are definitely not going to be having our medical supplies coming from China anymore. Like that's just it's not going to happen. So
well, I
they've got to
mean,
be concerned about
it's not
that.
just it's not even just that. But the
No,
thing
but I mean
is,
that's where it's going
what
to
killed
start.
us here, what got us up on the wrong foot was that you had Chinese nationals that own, let's say, supply chain, like distribution centers here and distribution companies here in the United States, that actually had a lot of PPE on hand, available, ready to go, and the
Oh
Chinese
yeah.
government bought it off them and they shipped it back to China.
Yep. Oh, I'm sure.
So, so we had it domestically, but then they shipped it over. They shipped it back overseas, back into China, so they can use it.
Yeah, so
So,
that's a this crisis concern. After this crisis is over, I guarantee you, there is no longer going to be drug and personal protective equipment production for the United States happening in China. At some point within the next year, it's all going to come either
I would
back
assume.
into the United States or to
I
Canada or
mean,
Mexico.
there's the whole thing of like pretty much every, almost a good amount of countries now. England is one of them. Politicians in England are one of them. Here in the United States, also other places in Europe, they're really calling for, let's say, like, repayment and retribution for
Well,
something like
what
this, what
what
China's did.
my
So,
guess is what's going to happen is a lot of the investments that China has made overseas are just going to get yanked right out of their hands. Oh, sorry, you lost in the court of public opinion, so we're just going to take all of the stuff you bought in our country. Goodbye. I think that's what we're going to see
yeah,
happen. because the UK think tank said that they owe 6.5 trillion or something like that. I don't know where they get that number from. It's not nearly enough, but my guess is that's probably roughly equivalent to the holdings they have outside of China. The land
Yeah,
and the
probably.
businesses that they own. So my guess is that there won't be any kind of a trial or anything, but there's just going to be bills passed in all these countries that say if it was Chinese owned, it's now owned by our country, and we're going to give it back to the people.
Oh,
That's my
well,
guess.
hopefully that happens. Hopefully that happens, but I don't
Yeah.
think that will. And
I'd you'd be
this is
surprised.
probably the
I
more
think people are pretty pissed.
this is probably the more black pilled side of me. But the thing is that I think at this point, like how I believe how the Chinese are operating and how pretty much every country, at least let's say politically, is operating. They want everything to go back to the status quo as fast as possible, and
You see,
unfortunately,
I think that's
um,
true. I think
they
that's true of
at least
domestic.
when it,
I think that's domestically true, but I don't think anyone wants it to go back to normal with China. The relationship that your country
well,
has with China is not going to go back to normal. That's guaranteed.
Well, no, I know that that's a you, I, and everybody here in this conversation doesn't want it to go back to the status quo, but those who are making money off the status quo, and those who run, let's say are like the drivers of this economy want to go back to the status quo
Oh,
because if things change, things are
I don't think
changing.
that I don't think they want to go back to the status quo. Apple's got to be pissed. If I'm Apple and I put all my eggs of iPhone production in the Wuhan basket, there's no way. There's no way that it stays in China after this. I mean, they might have to just because of the infrastructure and the amount of money that they've put in, but nobody is going to be putting in new investments in China. Nobody. It would
Well, the
be
thing,
the
but well, probably not new investments, but the things that are already invested there. Why would they want to throw everything back? See, the thing is that there's
well,
decades worth of work
well, yeah, but
and
the problem
groundwork
is
put into
if
China.
that's but the problem, Mikey, is the value. The whole entire reason that it works with us shipping over to China shipping everything here is because we know that it gets here. If there are disruptions to that supply chain, that's the most vital thing that any business has is that supply chain, and this disruption is beyond the pale. They cannot recover from it.
Well, that's why they've been underreporting their numbers.
Yeah.
So the
Well,
thing is they look like they're completely stable, and they're the only stable country, and really, um, let's say,
we
observably, they're the ones also lending the most aid to other nations. Now, it might be defective, it might be like contaminated, but they're the ones sending out more testing kits than anyone else in the world right now. They're the ones who are going and sending doctors anywhere else in the world right now. So the thing is that the face that they're presenting is that they are good and they're okay, even though that let's say the majority of the workforce still hasn't gone back.
yeah.
That they've forcibly migrated millions of Uyghurs back into the factories because their own citizens don't want to what do you call it want to work because of because of this thing. My bad. So really, it's when it comes to the long game of saving face. I don't know. Right, I don't know if I have your optimism because by the end of it, it how 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 opinion might work on those who actually make decisions. They might just want to keep it to the status quo for the fact that you know China might have been the one that actually unleashed this onto the world, but they're the ones who also save face quickest.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
I, I, I don't see your optimism for China because the problem is if there's one person that every
Well,
single
I'm not
person in
saying
this
it's
country,
optimistic. I've probably taken the more the depressing route between you and me at this
no, no,
point.
no,
I
I know.
mean, um,
Here's the thing. It has already been thrown around. Trump signing an executive order that makes it so that you are required to produce medicine in the United States or in North America. That's already been thrown around. I can't see that not getting signed. Trump was already on board with getting companies to come back to the United States with tariffs and everything else. He's only going to have an increased hand to play to get more and more manufacturing back into North America. And it was a game Trump was already winning. and now he just got dealt the best hand he could possibly hope for.
Yeah, I don't know. Just because we just recently signed another trade agreement, where in which I think was it like $250 billion worth of goods will be at least going between China and ourselves. When it comes to the Trump administration and let's say conservatives, they're not nearly as hard on the Chinese that they should be. And in many cases, I think they're doing it just to play nicely and to play safe with the Chinese government because of this thing.
Yeah, I don't
And
see that, but
I personally am under the opinion, unless harder, let's say, sanctions or harder repayments, and let's say like a very noticeable movement of industry back to this hemisphere. I don't think with the trillions of dollars that are invested in, let's say, the Chinese American, let's say, economic system. I don't think, I really don't think that things really are going to change all that much.
yeah, I'll have to disagree with you on that one, and we'll see who ends up being right in a couple months.
We'll see how it plays out. But I mean, as
Yeah,
as much as I think Apple is upset that things are disrupted right now, in the long run, like they're still paying cents on the dollar,
they're not though. The
and
value that China adds to an iPhone is nothing. So of the $1,000, so the numbers that I'm working off of are based on like the iPhone 6 or 7. And essentially, if that iPhone landed, cost the consumer like $500 or $600. Out of that $500 or $600, how much dollar amount value did China add to that phone? Would you guess if you just had to guess a number?
I don't know.
The
Probably very
answer is
little.
$5. It's $5. So they round up all the
$5.
materials, and then they put the phone together, and in that process they add $5 worth of value. Now the lithium that we get from Africa or wherever else, that's a big portion of the value. There's huge portions of value that come from the phone, most of which is the R&D that was done in the United States. So the value that China adds to these phones is absolutely nothing.
Well, the value that they add might be nothing, but the cost for them for was it the cost for the labor to, let's say, put all the assembly into that phone to then ship it back with
No, I
no
know, and
tariffs or very little tariffs
well, and
cost a whole lot
there's
less
plenty
than,
of
let's
other
say, to
countries.
assemble it domestically.
There's plenty
And
of other
so
countries that
the
can
thing
do
is,
it equally as cheap. Vietnam, but the other thing is these factories are
but still
getting
that. But
automated.
okay, hold on one second, Ryan. But the thing is that like that if I can further like expand upon that point, yeah, I know we're like when it comes to like maybe if just getting it out of China, but if ultimately I would personally like it back here, at least on this hemisphere, and just moving it to another nation only really kind of prolongs and only, let's say, um, how this kind of reinforces the globalized economy and
Yeah.
globalized system that led
Well,
us to this pandemic place in the first place. This
I think
pandemic issue in the first place.
ultimately I think most manufacturing is going to come back to the United States. So one of the things the manufacturer of the iPhone is called Foxconn. They actually physically assemble the iPhone. One of the things that they were talking about 5-6 years ago was laying off some huge percentage of their workforce. So even the cheap Chinese labor, the entire reason we bring it over there, even they're too expensive compared to automation. And the United States just has such a dominant position in the field of automation. We have all of the major tech companies. We've got all of the major innovations coming out of the United States, coming out of our research and development, coming out of our universities. So we have a huge advantage in that respect, and eventually it will be cheaper to produce in the United States than it will be in China, just because everything is going to be automated.
Oh, sorry,
Uh,
no.
no, it's okay.
Um,
So we had a few.
cheaper. I mean, cheaper in the like cheaper in the way is. Does that also coincide with like policies, which like, let me guess, like the is it HB or HV1 visas and stuff like that?
H1B, H1B visas.
So are you also kind of is there a factor of, let's say, bringing in legal immigration and or illegal immigration to drive down wages to then actually make it competitive with, let's say, China or like Vietnam or something like that,
Well,
or domestic manufacturing?
the problem for China is we're getting rid of all of the jobs that their people were doing. So it doesn't matter how much it matters, but it's significantly less of a factor how much the computer programmer or the engineer is getting paid when they're servicing 1,000 machines or 10,000 machines that are putting out the output that a million people would have done 10 years ago. So we're talking about increased production to easily offset the costs of those workers. And yeah, we're gonna continue importing H-1B visa workers from India, a little bit from China. But the other thing is we can just train people here to do those jobs. Those are the kind of jobs that people here
So,
would actually want to do.
yeah. So, but the thing is like don't you think having, let's say, a robust HV1 visa program versus, let's say, um, or like contrasted to, let's say, like a domestic what do you call it, a domestic value or domestic insight in, or not insight, but like a domestic push to actually train individuals in such jobs, depending, runs contradictory with one another.
What? Sorry. What's the contradiction specifically?
Between having a robust HV1's visa program where you bring
Mm-hmm.
when you bring individuals
Compared
from other
to
nations to come
training
do
them up.
jobs,
I would.
unless instead of focusing on, let's say, training citizens,
Well, that's assuming
native
that.
born citizens.
So the contradiction or the conflict is under the assumption that there's not enough jobs. If what I predict happens, there's going to be more than enough jobs. We'll need to pull from both pools. Does that make sense? So if there's enough
Well, I mean,
positions available,
it's not enough job. I thought it wasn't enough jobs. I thought it was that there's not enough labor for the existing jobs. That's
well,
usually the argument.
y-
When
that's
it
why we
comes
need
to,
the H-1B visas. But if we put more of an emphasis on training and vocational schools to do those kinds of positions, because a lot of those computer engineer, those types of positions, you don't need to go get a normal traditional college degree. That guy doesn't need to know English. That guy doesn't need to know history or anything else. They can just go to tech schools and trade schools.
yeah,
So
no, of course. But the thing is that with at least how the HV1 visa program has been implemented, over the last, I don't know however long, um, has more or less, in many cases. I mean, there was a good. So as an example, there was it happened down here actually with SoCal Edison. About 400 native, let's say, citizens were fired, and they were replaced by HV1's visa holders that were brought in,
well,
and
and
their last assignment was to train those workers their job before they were let go.
well, the issue there, if if I were the boss, what I would want to do, and I'm guessing that there were either legal or union or certain reasons that they couldn't do this, but if I was the boss, I'd say, hey, look, I'm bringing somebody over from India. It's going to cost me X, number of dollars per year for that person. Is that a wage you can live on? You know, that's what I would say. It's ridiculous for American workers to think that they should earn a certain amount just because they're Americans. If someone's willing to come over to this country and do it for less, bring them.
I highly disagree. Just for the fact that that's just, in my opinion, just an excuse to then just continuously just drive down wages, because then
What's wrong with
where
that?
does that then when does that like argue when does that line of thinking actually then bottom out or
It
like
bottoms
end?
out
Because the thing
when
is
it
that
bottoms out when the imported workers cost the same as domestic. I can show you exactly on a graph where it bottoms out.
okay, so but the thing is that yeah, of course, but then the thing is okay, hold on, let me get my clots together. But the thing is then you can continue driving. You can always continue finding foreigners that will take less and less,
No,
and
you
it's
can't
always a good
because
excuse
they
to.
had you can't just keep finding foreign workers because they have to have the skills to be able to do the job. So it's not the pool of foreign workers that can do skilled, computer and electrical engineering jobs is not indefinite. There is a definite number of those people. There's a definite number of them that are willing to come over to the United States, and currently they're willing to take a lower wage. And if they're willing to take a lower wage and they can do the same job that a domestic worker could do, by all means do. Let them take it, or that domestic worker can lower their price.
On top of was it already on top of the it's like already on top of like an inflated currency on top of let's say an increasing what is it when it comes to increasing amount for living expenses
Well, but those
for
people have to live
increase
here.
and
They're still living in the same place. They're willing to live in less lavish conditions.
I don't know, man. Like the thing is that I just like you can say that it equals out at one point on the graph, but in at least in my opinion, I don't think it just equals out. It's always just an excuse to get rid of to get rid of citizens from good
But
paying
here's the thing:
jobs
if
to have someone
those
come over and pay them less for a
well,
job that they were willing to pay someone else a certain price for. And I don't think that at least from my stance, that's just not that's really ultimately not fair, and I don't think it's good business practice. So at least when it comes to at least a domestic course.
yeah, I don't know. We
Especially
kind of we
when
kind
you
of
have
got down this
when you have
road
a
a little bit
large labor
farther
pool
than I was wanting to go down.
that's technically skilled. So well, maybe we just agree to disagree on that, but that's
Yeah.
just I don't find that to be good business practice at all. Um, especially when you're favoring let's say when you're favoring foreign workers over citizens that actually have the same skills.
Well, yeah,
So
but the problem is you're not no one is getting favored in this scenario, Mike. Neither person is getting favored. What's getting favored is the wage they're willing to work at. So, of course, a business favors people willing to work at lower wages. If the person here in the United States was willing to work for a competitive wage, they'd have a job.
but then when then in this process when is it actually tell to those worker to those domestic workers before they're
Uh,
let go, before their
Again,
last assignment is
I don't,
to train their replacements that come from a
I,
different country?
I
When
don't
is
know
that actually
what, I
expressed?
don't
It's
know
never
what the
expressed.
legal reasons are why
Not
they
with
don't get
with
that.
SoCal Edison. It wasn't expressed. It's not expressed with like AT&T. It's not expressed with a lot
Yes,
of these big tech companies.
and the problem isn't the
What is
companies,
expressed in what
Michael.
is
The problem
expressed,
isn't
my
the
good sir,
companies.
is that it's like, oh hey, guess
the
what? Your last
the
assignment is to train this
the
person.
problem isn't the
Quote unquote, you're
companies.
going to be reassigned to a different part of the company, and then
The
within a
pro
couple of months they get laid off.
the problem isn't the
So
company. The problem are the
that's
unions or the
there is
legal
no
requirements.
conversation.
Yeah, because they can't have it. They can't have the conversation because it isn't an open market for labor. The market for labor has been controlled by the government, and the controls the government has put on them is they can either fire these people and hire people at less. And that's it. That's the only option they have. If they could just reduce their pay and be like, "Hey, look, we got this guy. His name's Sanjeev in India. He's willing to come over and work in the United States for this amount. Can you match that?" If they were able to do that offer, I guarantee you the company would give that offer. Guaranteed. Because why would you want to go through
The
the
thing is
cost?
just then why is it those same companies going to the government and saying, hey, guess what? We don't have enough labor So they're not talking to their own employees.
Well,
They can go to the government
because
and say,
it's
"Hey, look, we
because you
don't have
can't
enough
just.
labor. Please expand the HV1 visa program. Let us bring these people over, right? Because it's good for business. It's good for our pocket. It's good for us. It's good for those who run the business. And then on the back end, go back to their employees without telling them a thing and go through the entire practice."
My
So the
my
thing
guess
is
is
that
it's because of
as
unions
I would like to
and labor
sympathize
laws.
with I would like to sympathize with, let's say, the government restraining these people from having these conversations with their employees. What they're doing is they're going to the government to expand these HV1 visa programs, and then telling their employees, "Oh, hey, guess what? We're restrained. We can't tell you these things, but we're going to lay you off anyway."
But
I don't
Mikey,
follow
you
that
don't know that that's
answer.
what's happening because these companies might be requesting increased H-1B visas for a completely different job in a completely different department. So you're equating two things that aren't necessarily the same. The request for increased H-1B could be in a completely different department that isn't the one that's getting laid off, and it just so happens they're also doing the layoffs in another department. So the amount of stuff that we don't know here,
That sounds awfully convenient.
it sounds awfully convenient for you that that it worked the other way. It's just as likely either way. They're huge corporations with hundreds of thousands of employees, and we don't actually have. It's not like we're looking at a you know a something that we can look at facts. So we're just sitting here talking and going back and forth, and the issue is I don't know if they were requesting the increased H-1B visas in order to bring them over and take those specific jobs. We just don't know.
Well, I mean, it just seems like it's a concurrent practice from from previous administrations up until this administration, as this administration has expanded HB1 visas, at least to my knowledge. Maybe not recently, just because of the whole
Oh yeah, I'm
outbreak,
sure
but
that's
it's
all on
still this kind
hold.
of current trend, and
Yeah.
at least to my disappointment with this the current administration, for not actually limiting, if not reducing or getting rid of this program in general. Because as this, at least this administration, the one I voted for at least, wanted to favor domestic workers, and at least with a program like this still on the books and still being run as it is, that to me is a complete contradiction.
Yeah, I we're not going to get anywhere with this. We disagree, and that's fair. But
Yeah.
Kevin, you haven't spoken for like the last 30 minutes. What's up?
I mean, it's been over a year and he still hasn't spoken. So
No,
I
that's
mean,
fair. Not much has changed.
Well, I don't have a perspective on markets and economics like that, but I'm of the persuasion that just let the markets run their course. If businesses
Yeah.
want to pay their employees less, and if then that's fine. If they can hire immigrant labor who are willing to work for cheap, then so be it. Eventually, if the wages get too low, people won't work for them, and then the business will have to make up for that and raise the wages.
Yep. And the only thing that impedes on that is the government because they are not allowed to renegotiate the contracts, so they have to fire them. Is where my guess is that process comes into play. But anyway, so Mikey, I think you had some links that you sent me earlier. Hello.
Mikey, you there, Mikey?
yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all good. I think that there were some web pages you had sent me that you wanted to take a look at.
Yeah, if you wanted to, man.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think they were in a conversation like I don't know how long ago, but
yeah, yeah. Yesterday, I have there's like a map of the coronavirus outbreak. Um, I've got a New York Times article about malaria drugs. Amazon, an Amazon warehouse article. Electronic Frontier Foundation. Any of those you wanted to talk about?
I mean, I don't know if I don't think I don't know if we'll be able to see the stuff, at least displayed on this end. But I mean,
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't
think
know
you
where the
guys
map
will,
is
but
now because the map continuously updates. But
yeah, let me
I
show
thought
the
it was
map.
interesting, at least when it comes to the Amazon article, because I actually know somebody who's running running a kind of an ad hoc strike at FedEx somewhere here in the state. I'm not going to say where or say at what location,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, pretty much. Let's say shipping. Those who work in kind of like the shipping industry, such as like FedEx, Amazon, stuff like that, overall have been kind of grievance by this whole thing.
Hmm.
Um, for many reasons, for the fact that they're considered essential industries because they're supposedly, how do you call it? Supposedly that they're essential because they're supposed to be essential for the fact that they're supposed to ship like PPE, they're supposed to ship like medical
Hmm.
equipment, supplies, and stuff like that. And ending up that in many cases they're not shipping any of these things. They're shipping more of like desks, bed frames, mattresses, and just like other, let's say, miscellaneous type things,
Hmm.
on top of the fact that on top of that their coworkers are being exposed to coronavirus, are not, and the management above them are not trying to, let's say, like, take the actual problem seriously. So at least this is from the people I've been talking to. So in many cases, why people are walking out or having their little ad hoc strikes and stuff like that is because they want to get paid hazard pay. Um,
Mm.
on top of the role that they have to be forced to be working in environments where they possibly could get sick, that they're moving equipment at a rate at, let's say, like at peak level, like holiday, um, how do you call it, at like holiday level, like peak shipping, capacity, and um, they're forced to more or less be there.
Yeah.
Not so it's not just like they say, like walking out because they're doing their job. It's they're walking out for the fact that like management doesn't particularly care about what the environment in which that, at least what's perceived, management doesn't really particularly care about the conditions that these guys are working in, what they're moving at the hours that at the hours that they're working them, and on top of that, their coworkers, or they're in an environment that they could potentially get sick with this thing. So,
Yeah, well,
so
and it's interesting how I completely agree that Amazon definitely needs to restructure how they pay these people, and I fully support them walking out if they think that their workplace is unsafe. They
yeah,
got to
I
figure
mean,
something out.
it's not just Amazon too. It's FedEx, it's UPS, it's all these places.
Yeah,
It's not reported, but there is discontent within that industry.
yeah. Well,
Um, and so in
they
many
got to figure
cases they're
something
just
out.
asking for hazard pay. That's at least the one that I know of. Let's say as an antidote.
Well, and
The
then
other ones I really don't particularly do know, but
and my guess is the WHO and all those different organizations that at the very beginning were saying, no, you don't need to wear a mask. Masks don't do anything. You remember all those reports?
oh, I do, yeah,
And
because it was because we were understocked for the amount of masks that we needed.
well, and that's
that's
true.
that's why they were
But
that's why they were pushing it.
it doesn't excuse them lying to us and saying that masks don't do anything, they don't work, because my guess is at this point, the Amazon employees could probably all have masks and different kinds of gloves and certain things that might help slow the spread of this of the disease at those factories. But because we had organizations like the WHO who were infiltrated by the Chinese through their money and personnel, if it weren't for that, we might have a lot more of that personal protective equipment than we actually do.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And the thing is like, so what
well,
I was
and the
gonna say,
worst
what's
part,
interesting about this virus is, especially when you want to compare it, like let's say, like, directly link it to this industry, is that the virus lives on cardboard for 24 hours.
well, it's
So
yeah,
no, it
and
does.
that's
I mean, it's been tested that it lives on cardboard for 24 hours. So how many? So if you have you have a cardboard box that you have to ship from anywhere, somehow someone infects it, puts their germs all over it. How many people does it touch? does it touch within this industry? Kind of I don't know, one of those things to consider.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing is, a lot of these companies are going to get off scot free for a lot of this stuff because they can use the Who as a cover. That's the worst part of all of this. These companies can
Oh,
make terrible decisions, and they can just use that and be like, well, at the beginning we got told by the WHO and all these other international organizations, we don't need to be doing this stuff. None of that stuff makes a difference. So we didn't. How can you blame us? We got our information from the source we thought was best.
well, not just it wasn't even just the WHO. It was also our own CDC and our own government.
Well,
It's
the problem is a lot of their directives are to take the WHO findings and just redistribute them. So again, I don't know who to blame. Obviously we can't use that as a directive anymore, but it's
It shouldn't
concerning.
have been a directive as the first place.
Yeah. Well, we shouldn't trust. I've never trusted any of these international organizations.
No, I think our I'd say our reliance upon these international organizations should be severely limited, if not taken into any consideration whatsoever.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I
and
like that.
concerning that, and I would say concerning this pandemic, the nations that have not taken the WHO anywhat seriously have actually done fairly better. Japan is a good example.
Yeah. I've heard Trump. He was. What was he talking about? He was. He was talking about withholding the money from the WHO, based on this whole. Based on the fact that they've done such a terrible job and lied to us.
No, good. I hope so.
So hopefully,
100%.
yeah, Trump.
I mean,
Here's an
But
article.
the thing is that the WHO, like with all these, let's say, like international organizations, let's say like the International Monetary Fund, um, and so on and so forth. A lot of these organizations more or less run upon the funding of the certain nations that are involved with them, and the more money that a certain nation kind of funds, the kind of the way that they lean. And the WHO has been taking a lot of money from the Chinese government lately, as of late, and they've been parroting what the CCP has been, spouting. So, and so actually, let's say a good ballast or a good read on how things are going in your particular nation for this thing is see what the WHO has to say and do exactly the opposite.
Yeah, pretty
So if the
much.
WHO says that if the WHO says the World Health Organization says you're doing a good job fighting this pandemic, you're probably not doing a good job.
Yeah. Well, and
So
and so I've been kind of skimming this article while you were talking, and it does look like Trump is at least talking about withholding the money that we send to them because we're their, the United States is the biggest funder of all these horrible organizations.
yep, and I think we should stop funding them.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. That's
So
I mean it's the reliance on these international organizations that have, let's say, maybe their ties, or let's say that have influences from anywhere else. And don't get me wrong, I mean they have to have international organizations such as this have to have how do you call it? They have to have an ear to all of their constituents, and they have to play it so no one gets offended,
yeah,
just so they can get the maximum amount of funding. But the thing is this kind of, how do you call it? This kind of like standing in the middle, teeter totter, just you know, well, just as let them to distribute just bad and horrible information to everybody.
yep,
So
yep. It's sad. Well, hopefully we start paying more attention to what we are funding and what we aren't. The United States in the last 50, 60, 70 years has just been the spending our money very liberally with all these organizations, and I think a lot of people are going to be calling for us to reevaluate if we're actually getting the bang for our buck that we should be, or if it's not. These organizations aren't actively, working against our best interest. Clearly, the WHO throughout this pandemic has been acting against the United States' best interest and against the best interest of the general welfare and health of the world. And that's
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
obviously
no,
the
when it
money
comes,
we've been spending there has not been to get that outcome. That is the opposite of the outcome we want. So we have to start, looking at what we can cut. And I say we
yep,
start
and
with just yeah,
I think with the WHO, yes, but I know I brought up the International Monetary Fund, the IMF.
yep,
That might be a little bit harder just for the fact that we run the petrodollar. So,
yeah.
um,
Well, well,
I mean,
and
if
sorry, what were you
so,
saying?
I mean, if we wanted to get rid of the IMF and we were going to get rid of let's say, all of the monetary international organizations and our involvement with them, we would have to really, let's say, reevaluate the importance of the petrodollar to our own economy, which
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
under the assumption that is very important. So,
and with the oil war that's going on right now, that whole system's under attack, at its foundation. So
oh,
we'll have to
this is a
see.
great time for everybody to start lowering prices on oil. Hey, look at like the economy is in flux, or not even flux. The economy is looking to go into another massive global recession. Guess what we need to do? We need to start an oil war globally. This
Well,
is fantastic.
it couldn't be better for my investing though. Not that I'm giving out stock tips or any kind of information that you should use to make money, but USO, man, that's where it's going to be at next week.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope you're right. I mean,
Well,
I
it's
just hope that.
it's
But
here's the thing: people are going to need to use gas, so it'll go back up eventually. That's just a fact.
yeah, it will go back eventually. But we'll see how long people are a significant amount of people are stayed shut indoors. So
Yeah. Well, we'll have to
we
see.
might never ever leave.
I don't think that's going to happen. Though
Yes.
I do, there is a good chance that we're going to reevaluate a lot of the different travel that we do and that sort of stuff going forward. So that might be an issue.
Oh, now there's something actually I wanted to ask you. Where do you think airlines are going to go? Like what's going to happen with the airline companies? Just because they're always a month away from bankruptcy.
Well,
Um,
I actually have a friend who just got, so he wasn't furloughed, he was completely laid off because his company, he worked for an airline called Compass, and they just completely went out of business. So there's going to be a lot of them that go out of business. Fortunately, all the physical planes still exist. So somebody's going to buy up those planes and somebody's going to be flying them around doing something.
Yeah, because I heard an interesting thing is the easiest way to get rich is to start an airline company and then sell it before you actually have to run the thing.
Yep, pretty
Um,
much.
because the profit to expenditure is so very low, is so very close
Yeah.
that no matter what little fluctuation happens, you're either gonna make a lot of money or you're gonna lose everything. So
Well, they're just based
so
on the model. In the 50s and 60s, when everybody thinks of the heyday of flying, you could get on a plane and get a great meal and smoke a cigar and everything else. The reason why we don't see that being the case anymore has very little to do with anything except for the fact that the model for airline travel has changed. It's not supposed to be some unattainable just for the rich thing anymore. It's let's cram as many people as we can into a plane and see how many we can get them how many we can get over to the next destination at the cheapest price. So
yeah, yeah.
it's just a
Well,
different industry
well, I
than it
mean,
used to be.
the one thing has remained the same. We mostly fly on planes made in the '60s, so that hasn't changed
Or well, designed in the
at
60s,
all.
that's for sure.
The
And the
seven the the 737 has been in operation since the 60s, and most of the
Yeah, yeah,
planes
yeah.
that fly today that are 737s, and they still have been made in the 60s. They
Hey, I
might
mean
have
they got a
newer
good track
stuff,
record.
but
If
it's
they're
still the
still in the
same plane.
sky, why fix something that ain't broke?
Well, I mean, they're falling out of the sky now, but
No, no, no. Those are
yes,
the new ones. Those are
I
the
mean,
new ones,
it's
Mikey. Not the old ones. The Airbus, A37 Max or whatever, the Boeing 797 or whatever it is. The new planes that are made out of plastic are the ones that are falling out of the sky. And yes, I do realize that I used
I mean, I
the
know
wrong
this.
names for both
I
of
know the
those planes.
787 was falling out because their batteries were catching on fire. But
There's a number of issues, unfortunately. The Airbus problems were pretty crazy. I mean, they were literally having issues where pilots didn't know what altitude they were at and flying into the side of mountains, and it was a nightmare. So
oh, I love it. This is
it's the
oh, it's
new planes
great.
that fall out of the
No.
sky.
You know what? I think we have to have more stuff like that when it comes to flying. Just because that just puts some adventure into people's lives.
Yeah, flying needs to be more
I'm
dangerous.
just kidding.
That's
I disavow. I disavow. Please make good products, people.
but
Like, like this is what
but
a
I
lot of people.
the
This is what a lot of people just want at the end of the day. Just make a good product. Don't let planes fall out of the sky.
well it's
Like
crazy.
it just.
It, it's crazy how the new fly by wire and all these new technologies they're just so much less safe than the tried and true methods that we've been using for the last 60 years.
Oh, what was Elon Musk's dream? The hypertube or something like that?
Yep.
Or he wanted to put a capsule in a
Vacuum
depressurized
tube.
vacuum
Yeah.
tube.
Yep.
Oh man,
Well, apparently the
great.
company, so the company he started to do that is called the Boring Company. And apparently they've been digging under LA for the last like year or two. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see, but I don't
Can
know. I mean,
can can you
it's
imagine
already
being in
safe
one of
enough
those
to
during an
put
earthquake?
take a pressurized tin can, put jet engines on it, and shoot launch it off from one end of the state to the other, or one end of the country to the other.
Well,
But
it won't
putting
be
a
jet engines
capsule
because there's
inside a
no
vacuum tube.
there. It won't be jet engines because it's in a vacuum. But yeah.
Well, no. I mean, I'm talking about the tin cans that we fly in now. Like those are
Oh,
literally just pressurized
oh.
tin cans with
Yes, yes,
jet engines on them.
yes.
That's fine. That's tried and true. That's been proven. But
That's
putting
fair.
a capsule rail, putting
Hmm.
it in a vacuum tube, that has a lot of problem. There's a lot of issues I can think of going wrong.
Yeah. Well, the biggest issue for me is how do you keep something like that depressurized? Like that's a lot of tube that you can't have any little leak in.
Oh, yeah. Well, the problem is when you actually get a leak. Woo, that's gonna be fun. It's like
I
running.
don't even
So the
want to
thing is,
know.
they want to shoot these things like at so many hundreds of miles of hour. So
I
many
think it's
hundred, 100
yeah.
miles an hour or something like that through these tubes. But then what happens when you have a leak and you have a wall of pressurized air
Yep.
in a vacuum?
Well, then it's all about
It's
the
literally almost a
sensors.
solid.
Well, and then it's all about the sensors, and did the sensors malfunction? It's a nightmare. But
Yeah.
was there
And
anything
then
else you wanted to
we're also an
cover?
earthquake country too.
Yeah. What was there anything else you wanted to cover? We're at about an hour 15, and I'm kind of wanted to keep these a little bit shorter than the 3 hour marathons we were doing before.
Well, hey! I know you're trying to remind me of something, and no,
Oh
I
no,
don't have any liquor near me,
I'm
so that's not. That's
if
not.
anyone was the culprit of it going for 3 hours, it was me. I'll sit here and I'll talk all night, but
No, I'm. It's been a long time. It's been a long time since I had the urge of going on a massive rant. So, no, but I'm good. Yeah, I think we can call it. I'm good to go.
Kevin, was there anything else you wanted to talk about? I know you're not the most talkative generally, so.
You were talking about, just quickly, I'm going to tell a quick story about, you were talking about the coronavirus at Amazon warehouses. My brother, he works for a large retail company,
Hmm.
and he got furloughed, and they offered him a job at the distribution center. He didn't take it, but then he found out later that 2 people tested positive for coronavirus at that warehouse.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh man, this leaks everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's quite as deadly as everyone thinks that it is. We don't actually know the numbers, of how many people contract it versus how many people end up dying from it. We don't know what the denominator is for that number, so it's impossible to know the percentage. So I don't think it's a terribly deadly disease, to be completely honest. Like, just look at the numbers. We've had far more deaths from influenza over the course of the same period than we have from coronavirus. So I don't know. I'm not convinced it's as deadly as everybody thinks it is. I do think it is contagious.
I don't. I'm just gonna say on the record, don't. How can I say? Don't discount Corona Chan. Just let her do her work, and I think we'll all be surprised by the end of the year. So,
Yeah.
it's just I'm not gonna discount her. So.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a good chance we'll have vaccines within the next year, and we'll be ready to go for the next season, probably coming up in October. I think we're going to
Yeah.
see it diminish for the rest of summer, and then it'll come back right around then, October November timeframe.
So. Well, hopefully things are that optimistic. I'm just gonna put it there.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, guys. Thanks for joining me here tonight. Glad that we were able to put this together. So hopefully we'll be able to do this more.
Oh, hey, not a problem. It's the getting back of the old gang. So.
Yeah. I'd be down to do this once or twice a week.
I think
Yeah.
so too. I think once a week for myself.
Okay.
I'm a pretty busy guy, but
That's fair. I'm not.
Yeah, you have a fancy job.
Yeah,
I do.
Damn jobber.
I have a fancy job.
Think you're better than
They
us?
took her job.
Damn right, I'm better. Damn right, I'm better than you. I got a job. Can't be taken away. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, guys. As always, it's been a lot of fun. So I think we're gonna end it right here. Whoever listens to this, thanks for listening, and hope you have a great day.
Yeah. Everyone have a good night.
Stay safe.